this was important to me. We talked about before we got married, and now you are stopping me from that, right? Like there could be a lot of resentment during these seasons. And if you can say, okay, well, those are important to me personally, but now we have these things that, are important to us that we've documented as here's our family goals. Then I can say, hey, babe, let me encourage you. Let me come from that perspective of let me helping you up and really let's realign towards, let's fight through this towards, okay, here's where we're going. Welcome back to The Donkey
and the Bee,
where men are jackasses
and women are biatches,
where we work together to build an extraordinary life.
Tune in to up your game in your marriage, entrepreneurship, and finances. Welcome back to another episode of The Donkey and the Bee with your hosts, Brett and Laura Shawkavis. We got the jackass over here. We got the biatch over here. We are coming at you talking all things marriage, entrepreneurship, and finances. The good, the bad, the ugly, the successes, the failures, all the above we are talking about. And today, specifically, we are going to be debunking a term that gets tossed around a lot in the marriage world, I'd say, in our culture. And that is that marriage is 50-50. What do you say about that, Brett?
So I thought, at least going into marriage, right, when we were first younger, that this is what it's supposed to be. And I think that, ideally you want to set things up to be in that perspective, to be 50-50, and perhaps not exactly you're handling half of the dishes and I'm handling, half of the bathrooms and that kind of stuff, right? But roughly, we're not in a place any longer where the man goes to work as a sole breadwinner and the woman stays at home and raises the kids and makes sure the house is great and has a Manhattan ready at 5:30. There is this idea of, hey, we should be sharing these roles and responsibilities, and I think that is what we do, and we have primary things that each of us head up, right? Like, we will say, hey, you're mostly in charge of this, right? You're going to take the lead on it, but I'm going to support you in it, and vice versa. That is usually kind of ideal, but never real life, right? And when we first got married, we had our wedding photo, and we had all the guests at our wedding go and sign like this area around it, right? And like leave a little encouraging note. So my aunt, I remember this specifically, probably the only one that I remember on that, was she wrote, marriage is not 50-50. And it hit me, right? Because I still remember it now. And I didn't have context to that. I didn't understand what you meant. I kind of knew from a academic perspective, okay, sure, that's what, marriage is not going to be even. But I didn't know it until a few years into our marriage where it was like, oh, wow, I really feel like I'm carrying a lot of weight here. And we've been through several seasons like that on both sides where we're just picking up the other person's slack. And I realize after maybe about year 10 of marriage that marriage is not 50-50. You can structure it to be pretty close to these things. But there's definitely seasons where it's 60-40, 70-30, or maybe even 80-20. But it all comes back, usually after you get through that hard season, it comes back to, hey, we're back in our flow and doing things normal, and we're close to sharing roles and responsibilities near 50-50 again.
I feel like this is never really talked about within a marriage. Like, now that you said all that you just said, we never actually talked it through when we were going through the seasons. It was just in a season, and we just kind of, if you were the person who was kind of having a hard season, you just kind of picked up a little more than the other person. We didn't talk about it. We didn't say, okay, you're going to pick up 70% since you're having a good season, and I'm having a really crappy season. I'm only going to give 30. Like, it wasn't something we talked about. And to be honest, I don't even think we do now. I think it's just,
no.
I don't think
and
we
you
do.
don't want to say, hey, babe, you're really sucking right now, right? Get your crap together. That's not really helpful. I think that person really knows, right? If it's an off day, that's just one day. But if you're going into something and it's truly a season, it's several months or a year or more, like, you're feeling like crap, and there's something that happened that is now causing this, funk.
Yeah.
And it's not best to throw shade and be like,
true.
hey, you're sucking.
Exactly. I think the one example that I can think of, like when I first got married, was Brett was going to be a firefighter, and so he went to his fire academy. He was gone, and so he wasn't working. And, we still had to pay rent. We still had to do we had to pay everything. And so I picked up a third job. So I had 3 jobs at the time. I was working from, morning till night every day. And, we didn't have kids, so it's a little easier. But that was a really hard season for me, but it was also a really hard season for you. So we
sucked.
Both had hard seasons because we were both, I was supporting and you were getting ready to support the family, right? You had to go through Fire Academy in order to go to the next level. And so it was interesting that we both had a hard season, but we both, put our adult pants on and went for it. Like we didn't question it. We didn't, it didn't make us waver is what I think I'm trying to say is we grew through it and we supported each other through it.
So there's multiple different reasons that people get into these kind of seasons where it's less 50-50. And we've experienced some of them. Sometimes it's job related. Sometimes it's physical, like an injury or illness. Sometimes it's an addiction, or maybe it's the way the family dynamic is going, kids having issues, and it affects one person more than the other. So I've had a time where I had a back injury for about 6 or 12 months, and I was almost debilitated, like could barely walk and move and was just in crazy amounts of pain, right? Wasn't able to carry the normal weight that I do for the family. I feel like, what I've seen for you is that you have these seasons specifically work related. Work really can get in your head. And there's been 2 seasons during our marriage they're both maybe 2 years long-ish. And one when we first got married, before we got into entrepreneurship, where you were working for the city and you despised your job and you were coming home every day crying. Like that was a hard season where you weren't the same. You were in your own head and you were really quiet, and it was just, our relationship was different. There was another season where we had our assisted living, and it was through COVID, which really sucked. And then through the post-COVID situation where nobody wanted to work and the government was giving free money to everyone, and you were doing all the interviewing and the hiring and literally having like 8 to 10 interviews booked a day, and none of them, 0 people would show up, and you were sitting there so frustrated, and all you had to do was claim to the government that you were having an interview and they would give you money for another month or 2, right? It was BS system, where you like almost lost confidence in humanity, where you're like, what is going on? And you're very relational. And I think you were having a hard time with that because you're like, what is wrong with society, right? Like nobody wants to work. No one's keeping their commitment. Like we're hiring these people and they're lazy. They're whatever, right? There was this culture for a little bit of a time, and it has rolled over, but maybe not to that same extent. But during that season, it was really hard on you mentally and emotionally, and you kind of like close off, and you're just not you, that same like high energy, friendly, bubbly, the life of the party woman that's really you. And that kind of closed back off. And it was the same with our girls, right? Like that high spirited, hard work, high play with our daughters, you kind of closed into that little shell. And I think you were just in your head, just trying to process or figure out, or maybe in pain through some other things that were going on in that season. Mm-hmm. But it was maybe 2 years or so where I felt like I was picking up a lot of the slack on the business side, on the parenting side. And I knew going through that season with you once before, right, where you had that previous job, that this would pass, that this was not going to be forever, right? I remember you saying to me like, hey, when will this ever stop? This whole Great Resignation thing, like, will we ever get back to a normal marketplace where people actually want to come to work? And you were just like so burdened by it, right? It was directly affecting you in what you were doing as your position. And then the market just shifted, right? The government stopped giving away free money and people realized they had to get back to work. And then it was like almost overnight, like the market had shifted. We were spending, I don't know, $3,000 a month on job boards to try and just fill our positions, then to like, hey, we can spend $0 again, right? The market had corrected itself, and now all of a sudden everyone wants a job again. And so I knew going into it, at least the second round, the first round I didn't. The second round, I knew going into it, like, this will pass. I just need to be patient with Laura, support her through these things. and, say to myself, like, let's focus on the small little wins here of each single day, because we will get back to a place where, you've grown and you've moved past this spot.
So when you say all these things, it makes me think of the wedding vows, right? For rich or for poor, for sickness and in health, the death do us part. I think it's these things that you say on your wedding day, but don't really know the weight of those words until you're actually in it. And so when you do say in sickness and in health, you only think about the health. You don't ever actually think about the sickness part. And so when you actually go through it, then you know the weight of it, and you mature and you grow through it. And then I think that's when you know the next hardship you have, you're going to get through it. And so I think it's just getting through that first or second kind of hard season with your spouse before you realize that this too shall pass. And so I don't know, I always think about the wedding vows and the commitments that you make on your wedding day. It's such a blissful day, right? Like, you're not thinking of the hard times you're gonna encounter. But that was a commitment we made to each other. And so we have hard seasons, we all will. And I think the weight of it is hard, the weight of it is heavy, but knowing that that load will lighten up after that season, I think is a good mentality to have. Because if you're like me, in those first couple seasons that I had, like you said, I was lost. I was lost in my own head, and I couldn't get out. It was like I was running this like circle in my head, like, this is never going to end. What do I do? And I didn't have that this too shall pass mentality like I do now. I think that if I was to go through that again, it would be difficult, but I would personally be able to not get so bogged down by it.
Yeah. So there's two things that I want to talk about and maybe prepare someone for, because you're going to have hard seasons and good seasons. So what do you do during the good seasons? And then what do you do during the hard seasons? So on the good seasons, right? Like, everything is smooth, things are going well, everyone's healthy, happy, and you're in a nice, routine. And hopefully that's most of your marriage, right? And, you have more good seasons than bad. Some people have, harder lives than others, but I think that it is important that you really set this like core foundation of appreciation and bonding and common goals and commitment to each other while it's easy. Because ultimately, if you're having struggles on your relationship during the easy times, as soon as you get to that first hard season, I mean, this is really when you see what's down there, right? You see your foundation. So we talked through that we have core values for our family, these shared things that we decided these are important to us, right? We've talked about our time freedom. We talked about financial freedom, vacation, doing these certain things with our kids, our faith. And where I think will help you during this potential, good season and bad season is going through this exercise. It's saying, hey, here's what are important. I have my own personal goals for each of these things. You have your own personal goals. And then we have our shared, as a family, here's what we want for each of these items. Because ultimately, I think when it gets hard, it's easier to come alongside your spouse and say, hey, babe, here's what we're going towards, right? Like, I know you're having a hard time now, but let me pull you up. Let me encourage you, right? Because this is not what, it's not about me. It's not about the sacrificing of my goals. I can say, well, you know what? Here's the core that we said for ourselves, our family unit, right? Like, let me help you up so we can get towards this. Let me encourage you for this. Because I think otherwise, you may come from a position of resentment. Like, hey, I said that I needed to make this much money a year, or I need this many vacation days, or I want to travel and do this, right? Like, this was important to me. We talked about before we got married, and now you are stopping me from that, right? Like, there could be a lot of resentment during these seasons. And if you can say, okay, well, those are important to me personally, but now we have these things that, are important to us that we've documented as here's our family goals. Then I can say, hey, babe, let me encourage you. Let me come from that perspective of let me helping you up, and really let's realign towards, let's fight through this towards, hey, here's where we're going.
Having shared goals is definitely a goal in your marriage, but I think it's something that's difficult to achieve. And I think because we, as the human race, we have a tendency to be selfish. We tend to want what we want first, and everyone else can be second. And I think that that's the opposite of what needs to happen in this circumstance with the common shared goals. Is you need to put your partner first. You can't have that selfish attitude. You need to be selfless. What does my partner want, or what do my kids need, or it's not a me mentality. It's a you and a we together. And so I would assume that most people would think they're selfless if you were to poll 100 people together in a room and ask them if they're selfless and they put other people first. Of course they're going to say they are. But if you were asked their spouse that same question, I'm sure that it would not be the same answer. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's taking inventory on yourself and your thoughts and your actions. Because if I take inventory of my thoughts and actions, it's not always 100% selfless. Like, there's some selfish mentalities and attitudes that I'm still working on as an individual. And so I think within the marriage together, not having that selfish mentality is I honestly think it's kind of the heartbeat of it. It's vital. Like, you need to have that within your marriage.
So, okay, talking about selflessness, it's super hard, right? And I think if you can come at it from this perspective of this is only a season, and you may not know it the first round, right? It may seem like you're stuck in this thing forever, and why can't he or she get their crap together? But after a few, lessons and maturity in your marriage, you can recognize, hey, we're in this rough season, but I know this will pass. We've passed through these things before. And from that perspective, it may be easier to say, okay, every single day, let me focus on helping, right? Let me focus on being selfless. Let me pull my spouse up. Let me encourage. Because ultimately at that season, they need healing, right? They need growth. They need something, time or whatever it is, to get through what they're getting, struggling with. And I like to focus on the small wins during these kind of seasons, right? Like, you kind of just take it one day at a time, and one day you'll wake up and like all of a sudden the light will switch and you're like, oh, we're past this, right? Like, oh, I didn't even realize. Fantastic, right? But if you can be selfless during that time and know, just one day at a time, let's focus on the little things that are going great, because I know that I will get through this. And I want the same thing when I'm in that hard season, right? Like, I want that grace and mercy, and I want my spouse to be there holding my hand or helping me up or pushing me through a hard time.
I think when I was struggling in I'll say dark season, because it was really dark, I was stuck in my own negative thoughts. And it was almost like a record that was played over and over and over again every day. From the second I woke up, I opened my eyes to, when I closed my eyes at night, it was the same negative thoughts that were completely just taking over my whole mind. And so I think it was once I took that record and scratched it and snapped it and was able to put a new record on of positive thoughts, of winning thoughts, of overcoming thoughts, that's kind of where everything changed. And so I don't know how you really I know you encouraged me through it all, but I think, to be completely honest, it was me that needed to take charge. And it was me that needed to just take that record that was playing and snap it. Because if you would have done it, it wouldn't have helped me learn and helped me grow. And so I think it's the spouse's, I don't want to say role, but in the way that you did it was you were patient. And I think that is another aspect of it, of being patient. It's being selfish and being patient is incredibly difficult, especially when you just want to go, let's go. Come on now, on to the next season. And so I think that that's an important thing for you as the spouse, if you are taking on most of the weight of that season, to have patience as well.
So it's not like I was just waiting there with infinite patience, right? Like, I was trying to help you through these seasons, and you have this specific thing and you were seeing it in a certain light. But over and over again, I would say, hey, babe, it's actually like this. Like, this is a monster inside your own head, and it's honestly so small, but you're making it big. But you weren't able, perhaps, to receive that or understand it. There was some growth thing that needed to happen for you in that respect. So I was active in encouraging you and putting it in context, like you were bigger than this, you were stronger than this. You just weren't ready yet, and you had to get through a couple things on your own to get to that stage. But yes, it was patience. It was day by day. It was little things of encouraging and really just being by your side, because I knew you would get through it, right? Like I knew one day it was just gonna be like, hey, I'm good now. I'm past this. I'm ready. Like let's go.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you say that, because there were many times when you would try to encourage me and say those things, and it would so piss me off even more. Like internally, I knew you were trying to be helpful, but like it's almost like when you're trying to speak life to demons, like they're gonna get mad, like they're gonna get frustrated and like resist. And I think that's what it was. It was like you were speaking the life, and it was just like I was resisting, I think is what it was. And so I think it depends on the spouse, but I'm very much not like a traditional woman. Like I feel like I have a very man mentality, and so I could take it. But I think if you know your spouse, if they can handle it or not, I think encouraging them in a way that they're going to receive it, even if it pushes their buttons a little bit, I think is a good thing. Because being uncomfortable is the only way that you're going to grow. And so it was uncomfortable for me to hear those things, and it did make me mad. But it is what it is, right? Like I was pushing past it. So.
Well, that's one perspective. From a man's perspective, men are just very blunt and kind of can be a dick a lot of times. So men, if you're trying to encourage your spouse, don't be a dick, right? Like be way softer and way gentler than you think is reasonable, and then you'll still probably be too much. So just try and take it down to as much as you can. Be like a little mouse, and because you'll still be pretty aggressive or strong, especially because your spouse is in a hard, sensitive season.
I mean, but vice versa, role reversal. Like you are a very intense, passionate person, but I still feel like if you're in that hard season, that I still need to come at you with love and with grace, even though that's not really that's not your language. Like you don't really talk that way, but I still feel like if you're in that sensitive season, you're gonna need to hear it with grace and love.
For sure.
With a little bit of spice. Kick to the end.
That's what I relate to. So you gotta speak my language.
Exactly. Well, thanks again for joining us on another episode of The Donkey and the Bee. We do have one ask for y'all. If this episode meant something to you, if you got a gold nugget, if it really was life-changing, would you please just share it? Share it with a loved one, share it with a friend, share it with whomever you feel really needs to hear this message. And we will see you on the next one.